Peeping Tom is a frightening experience. It's also a thrilling one because it gets close, very close to the heart of the impulse deep within filmmaking. I mean, to make films, to make images and stories from those images, other imagined worlds, really, it's exciting and intoxicating, which means that it can get a grip on you, and unless you're very careful, it won't let you go. To capture someone's image on camera is a very powerful act. We've forgotten that now since we're so overrun with images here in the Western world. There's a reason why taking someone's photograph is still forbidden in some cultures. The belief is that you're stealing a piece of their soul, and to a certain extent, and I can understand this, when someone agrees to appear on camera, whether it's in a fiction film or a documentary, we shouldn't forget that they're giving something very special of themselves. This is what Michael Powell captured in Peeping Tom. Powell dared what no one else had dared before him, to show us how close movie making could come to madness, how it could eat you up. He was telling an extremely uncomfortable truth, something that nobody really wanted to know, on top of which he was doing it in a spectacular lurid Eastman color, images that almost recall the covers of porno magazines. And he paid the price. I mean, Peeping Tom put an end to his career in England, and he had to go to Australia in order to find what little work he could later on. When I saw Peeping Tom, my first reaction was, could this have been the same man who made the red shoes, made this picture? Could that be? But then, of course, I realized that there was a very strong link between the two pictures, just as there's a sort of vital continuity running throughout all of Michael's pictures, with and without Emmerich Pressburger. Michael was always showing us how necessary art is and how far it can drive you in your passions. And he was also showing that it could consume you if you weren't careful. In a sense, Peeping Tom was his last word on the matter. It's also one of his greatest films.
For people of my generation, Michael Powell was Peeping Tom. That was the film that we discovered, we thought, in the 1960s.
I was working as an editor with Thelma, actually, Thelma's Goodmaker, on some of these documentaries. And there was this wonderful filmmaker, Jim McBride, who did David Holtzman's Diary. And he was the first to tell us about Peeping Tom.
It was like an underground film. It was hard to see. It had a scandalous reputation. But nobody knew too much about who Michael Powell was at this time.
He understood me in the deepest sense of the word, understood in the soul, in my feelings and whatsoever, is to me unique. I never had that with any other director in all my career.
He was like a slap in the face, I've always said, because he just, whenever he said anything, it was fresh and new. Cliches never even came anywhere near his brain.
If you just encountered him this way for the first time, you wouldn't have realized that he'd been one of the mainstays of British filmmaking right through the 1930s and through the 1940s, and in fact had been, in some ways, the most famous British filmmaker of the wartime period. He'd gone to France as a young man and got some experience working with Rex Ingram, who was a Hollywood director, and that had given him his first taste of what working on a big scale could be. This was just at the end of the 20s.
So he learned about editing, he learned about camera work, he learned about direction, acting, he even wrote titles for the silent film.
But the war gave him a fantastic opportunity, and he grabbed it with both hands. He formed a partnership with Emmerich Pressburger, a Hungarian refugee.
Michael's the only one who directed, but they both wrote and they both produced. And they were lucky enough that during the war, no one noticed what they were doing. They created all these original masterpieces, what Scorsese calls the greatest period of anarchy within a major film studio that's ever happened.
What links Powell throughout his films of Pressburger and ultimately the film which he's sole director on, Peeping Tom, is this sense of danger of art. And I think you get this in Red Shoes, where extraordinary Moira Shearer, in a sense, dies for her art, and it's worth dying for. And this is something that I guess I accumulated as ideas accumulated over the years about why I was attracted to these films. And I think you sense this, a darker side of it, certainly, if you could go even darker. In Peeping Tom, you had this where the art becomes sinister and perverse in a way, or the cinema itself can be perverse in a way, and the act of making movies can be perverse in a way.
I think Peeping Tom was a departure from Michael Powell. First of all, he was not working with Emmerich Pressburger. At that time, he was working with a new writer who did not know a great deal about film, but had wonderful original concept for the film.
Yes, I think Leo Marx came to Michael Powell with a project about a life of Freud.
They probably would have done that had they not heard that there was another project by John Huston with Jean-Paul Sartre, who was also planning to make a film about the life of Freud. So they thought, we can't do that, we've got to do something different. And at that point, Leo Marx came up with the idea of a film about a voyeur.
It's, as we say, a fortunate accident, because the project that they then moved to by a kind of displacement, I think was one that kind of analyzes the Freudian aspects of the human mind through the cinema in a way that perhaps would have been more difficult if they'd taken Freud more directly.
The central figure, Mark Lewis, was not played by an English actor, which would have been the obvious thing. He's meant to be an English character, but the choices that Powell had didn't work out, and Lawrence Harvey, who was then a very hot property, was snapped up by Hollywood and so wasn't available. He moved to a very surprising choice, which changed the whole complexion of the film.
I think that Karlheinz Böhm brings something to the film in his performance. To find a performer who can both make Mark genuinely engaging and also able to understand the depths of his psychosis was very hard.
You try to understand the human being you are supposed to play, and by understanding it, to interpret it in such a way that you can identify yourself 100% with the person you play. And it went so far that I had a circulation collapse once during the shooting time, and that's because I identified myself so much with this person that it was one of the hardest times I had in my life, I must admit.
Usually a murderer is a murderer, and you can't identify. It's dangerous to have an audience identify or have any sympathy for him or her. And I think this, M does it, Peter Lorre in M, that speech he has at the end. I don't like Peter Lorre in M. I mean, he's a great actor. It's a great film. I don't want to have sympathy for the child murderer. And yet Fritz Lang at the end has the audacity to do it. And it works. It works.
Some of the key scenes are things like Miles Malleson as the sort of upper-class old man who comes into the newsagents and makes an excuse he wants to buy the Daily Telegraph, but he really wants to buy some dirty pictures. And of course he's mortified when a schoolgirl comes in. And that sort of sense of hypocrisy, of having a kind of erotic fascination, but not wanting to be upfront about it, is very much what the film is about. It's about repression. In the case of Mark Lewis, the central character, he could almost stand for English society. And having been brought up in this extraordinary way, he naturally, like a good and dutiful son, wants to continue that process. But what began as science, in the case of his father, has become something monstrously perverted.
My relationship to Michael, I'm his son, one of his sons, anyway, Columba. And I played, uncredited, I played Mark Lewis as a young boy.
I think that Michael didn't take the whole idea of using himself and his son so seriously when he did it. I think he just thought, oh, well, this is a good idea, and Columba will be a good actor, and it'll be fun for us all to be making it together. I really don't think he expected the storm of reaction that he got for doing it. Columba himself quite enjoyed making the film.
In a way, he did feel that it was something best kept within the family, after all. He was able to talk to his son, as a father would talk to a son, and able to talk to him on the set in a kind of reassuring way.
Yes, everybody thinks I should be traumatized by it, but it's a movie. That was the movie, and the real life was different.
We see the childhood films of Mark, which are absolutely chilling because they're so amateur. It's the very fact that they are wobbly, that they're blunt, that they're direct, that we see a lizard being thrown down. That's shocking. It's shocking in a new way.
It's very modern, and the material required that. Of course, it was a much more contemporary film than he had made in a long time. And I noticed when I was looking at it recently that there are some many, many wonderful dramatic sudden dollies into actors that are very sharp and used at very critical moments in the film, which I don't think you would have seen in earlier films that he had made. They were having such fun experimenting and doing wonderful things, like when Karl Böhm leans over, surreptitiously photographing from rafters, and his pens fall out of his pocket, and this will reveal that there's someone up in the rafters. They built huge, big, long wooden pens and pencils and things and experimented with shooting them falling to the camera. They were just having a great time.
What struck us was, again, the way he put the film together, the use of light, the use of color. This time was Eastman color, a lurid kind of Eastman color. The picture has a nasty edge to it. It brings you to a close, it brings you to, in a funny way, a strange base feelings of a lurid quality, like looking at something of a tabloid, of a National Enquirer almost, only in color.
So it's a film which tells us a surprising amount about the state of cinema in Britain just around the beginning of the 60s. The film we see being made in the studio, where Mark is an assistant cameraman, is a stupid film. It's the kind of stupid film that actually brought British cinema to its knees. The other kind of filmmaking, which is just about to start, is going out into the streets and filming in the streets, cinéma vérité, as it became known. And really, Peeping Tom is a kind of cinéma vérité film. Mark is a kind of rather perverted cinéma vérité filmmaker. But there's a third kind of filmmaking in it, or photography, which is glamour photography. And of course, that was also something which kept British cinema going. There was quite a lot of business making what nowadays seem rather mild pornographic films.
Ultimately, whatever one can say aesthetically about the film, it is a disturbing picture. It's not a film for everyone, but also it's by a man who knows what a camera is and what a camera can do. The metaphor for a camera killing is very true, I think. That's what makes it, that's one of the things that makes it a great film, I think.
When Peeping Tom was released in France, it was called Le Voyeur, and Michael always thought it should have been called Le Cinéaste, in other words, the serious film lover.
Michael Powell, I think, was intuitively interested in the mechanics of the gaze. If you just think about what's actually going on, we're watching a filmmaker who is looking through his camera and who is holding up a mirror to his victims who see themselves. And so we're involved in a kind of almost an infinite regress. It can't help but produce a kind of meditation on cinema as a voyeuristic machinery.
You're involved in the voyeuristic experience, and there's no getting away from it.
Lines like "Take me to your cinema," which can become really disturbing and off-putting in a way. And there is a lot of cinema that is that way. But "Take me to your cinema" becomes something very private, because who knows what goes on in the head of a viewer, of any film, really. You know, you bring to a film, very often, something completely different from what the filmmaker intended or what the filmmakers intended. You have people who live by films. You have people whose lives are cut off, in a way, and just live through cinema. I don't say it's a good thing, either, who just sit and watch.
Mark Lewis is, in a sense, an artist. In fact, he clearly is an artist. He's someone who has dedicated his life to making a perfect film. Now, this perfect film might be what we would call a snuff film, a film that actually deals with, if you like, the ultimate unfilmable moment of someone witnessing their own death.
Mark's final suicide is almost as well a tribute to death within the cinema. If you remember, Mark sets up a number of strip wires of still cameras, and he then runs to his death, tripping over the still photographs, which then take the cinema to stillness and to its own annihilation.
In Britain, there's a kind of gruesome fascination with the reception of Peeping Tom, because it had an unbelievably bad reception from the press critics.
Michael took great relish in incorporating all the bad reviews in his own autobiography. And there, when you read them, you just cannot believe. You can't believe them. This film should be flushed down the toilet. This is worse than any sewer I've ever visited in Calcutta.
It's not that he didn't take the film seriously, but he didn't take it seriously in the way that many people did. He didn't see it as something perverted, outrageous, exploitative.
Basically, his career as a director, and he was one of the most famous directors of the whole world, was finished by that film.
It was just shattering what happened. The film was ripped out of the theaters, sold to a not very good distributor, and vanished until Scorsese brought it back to the world 20 years later.
My assistant at the time I was doing Raging Bull, about to do Raging Bull, came to me and said, I know these young guys at Corinth Films at that time who said that they know that you're a fan of Peeping Tom, and they would like to re-release the film and say, have your Martin Scorsese Presents. It would be $5,000. I said, if I can have a print of the film plus the $5,000, I would give the $5,000 plus a print, and I'd be delighted, to have that happen.
Michael gave so much to Marty in terms of tremendous inspiration and teaching. And here Marty was able to give back to him by getting Peeping Tom re-released, among all the many other things that Marty did for Michael. But that concrete exchange was so beautiful.
The film was reshown in New York by Martin Scorsese, and it was to be said one of the best films of the 100 films of the last century to be done. And the critics were so extraordinary that one couldn't believe it. And it showed that the people simply did not understand it at the time when the film was done.
I think there are a lot of filmmakers who've been inspired by Peeping Tom. Because it was such a kind of secret discovery for many, it seemed like a sort of message in a bottle. It was something that was addressed to filmmakers. It's also influenced the work of Brian De Palma in many ways, I think. De Palma's tremendous interest in voyeurism. It's influenced Coppola. You find little strands of it in Coppola. And of course in Polanski. All of those really stem from Peeping Tom, I think. So it's a kind of modern classic. But it's a shocking one still.
This was an assault, this film. It was a slap in the face in a way. And bold slap in the face to an audience. And we can understand at that time why it was reviled.
Not only in film, but in art in general. Very often it happens that the artists, in that case I call Michael Powell, I name Michael Powell, are far ahead from their time.
He once said in an interview with Bertrand Tavernier, he said, I'm not a filmmaker who's got a style of my own. I'm just cinema. He says in his memoirs that everything that he learned about in life in a way came to him through immersing himself in cinema. Cinema was his life.
He never wanted to stop experimenting or stop growing as an artist. So I think he kind of felt that that was part of his responsibility as an artist, that if people couldn't take his art at that moment, he knew that maybe 20 years later they would be able to. But he accepted it. He didn't become bitter about it. He just accepted it, or digested it, shall I say.